Welcome back to the Gentleman's Gazette. I'm here with the wonderful Michael Quinn.
Oh, you're so kind.
Michael, thank you
are
for
so
coming.
kind.
We're sitting here in St. James's Square Park, and as you can see, Michael is already dressed to the T. We wanted to speak about...
Oh no, I just threw on whatever was there, really.
Well, you must have a wonderful closet. I'd be interested to see that one day, but...
maybe one day.
We wanted to talk about...
Yes.
What Ralph Lauren really did for menswear.
Oh, my word.
And Michael, you've worked for Ralph Lauren?
I have. I had that privilege. It was a great honor. It was a great honor. I had a very long retail career. I would say working for Mr. Lauren was the greatest honor of my retail working life.
And
the man is extraordinary. The business is beyond compare. Fascinating, intriguing in every possible way. I started working for Ralph when I was 50. I hit 50 and I started working for Ralph. So I already had an extensive career in retail. But the people I met, the people that surrounded me were of an exceptional caliber. They were remarkable. I was astonished the things I learned. So much. Where should we begin?
Well,
where should we begin?
Let's quickly start with your retail career. When you get into retail?
I got into retail after university. I came to London and I worked for Harrods, but specifically for a company called Rayne, R-A-Y-N-E, who were the Queen's shoemakers.
Interesting.
The Queen's shoemakers.
And what year was that?
And that was in 74.
Okay.
So that was in the days when ladies would change their shoes several times a day. They would have shoes for cocktails, occasional shoes, evening shoes, obviously. Rayne came out of theatrical world. So it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And if I may jump forward about 50 years, I concluded my retail career working for Crockett & Jones, who, of course, owed the royal warrant for King Charles. So I bookended my retail career, very much involved with the royal family.
Very nice.
Which was wondrous. And in between came Mr. Lauren, which is fashion royalty, as you know.
Yeah. So what year was that?
2000.
2000.
I worked for 4 years, and as I say, it was gloriously enjoyable. I wore 2 hats for Ralph Lauren. I was their accessories manager. So any product which was not clothing or furnishings, which is shirts and ties as they refer to it, that was my product assignment. So that was all footwear, men's, women's footwear, ladies' handbag, luggage, belts, scarves, socks, jewelry, the whole kibosh. So that was a pretty demanding product assignment, but I was also their training manager. So I delivered training for all of the staff here in London. Whenever they opened a new shop in Europe, I would travel there as well, delivering the company's training package, as it were. So lots of customer skills, soft skills, greeting skills, conversational skills, building client skills, but also product seminars. So any given time, most mornings I'd be somewhere in the store teaching about cordovan footwear or jet jewelry or construction of a woman's handbag. So it was fascinating, Raphael. It was absolutely fascinating and really tested me. But the things you learnt were remarkable.
So if you had to sum up Ralph Lauren's style in one sentence, could you do that?
Can I do it in one word?
Of course.
Passion.
Passion.
He, when he started out, you probably know the story about the big ties,
Well,
the fat ties.
Let's talk about that
We
story.
can get into that, but that was the starting point. That was the genesis of Ralph Lauren, and it was so successful that before very long, people started to knock him off. So there were other tie manufacturers, and they were making wide ties with 4-inch blades made out of furnishing fabrics. And Ralph was very frustrated. He was very angry. He was terribly upset by this. And one of the buyers said to him, he said, "You know, Ralph, the difference between your ties and their ties?" He said, "Love. You love what you do." Raphael, I heard a story from a client in the Ralph Lauren store once, and he said to me, he said, "Michael," he said, I bought a tie by Ralph Lauren." I said, "Oh, that's nice. You bought this Ralph Lauren tie. You bought a Ralph Lauren tie." He said, "No, I bought a tie from Mr. Lauren, the man." So I just happened to be in the Rhinelander Mansion in New York, and he was there. He was up on the men's floor. And he said, "I have never seen anyone handle a piece of merchandise with such love." He caressed this tie, and you could tell that he adored every element of it. Very good point for a salesman. The way you hold the garment, hold the shoe, hold it as though it's precious.
And you know, he started with the ties, and at the time, skinny ties were fashionable.
Correct.
And then he had those wide ties. And I think, you know, in menswear, you always have these phases, right? You have maybe 1-button jacket, 2-button jacket, 3-button, it's maybe 4, and then it goes back to 3, to 1, and so forth. Ties get wider, get slimmer,
Yes.
a little shorter, a little
Yes.
longer. I think that's the part. And, you know, he started as a tie company, but what I find even more remarkable is that he didn't leave it at that. And he also didn't leave it at the typical, "I'll just create a clothing brand."
Yes.
But it went far beyond that.
Yes, absolutely. There was something in the wind in 66, 67, and he picked up on that vibe. It was extraordinarily intuitive. And he came to England, I think it was in 66, and visited Turnbull and Asser, which is a bow tie's throw from here in that direction. And I used to work quite closely with Turnbull and Asser, and they showed me a letter in their archive from Mr. Lauren in 1966. He had visited the store and thanked them for their service. Now,
those were the days when you wrote handwritten letters as a thank you note.
Absolutely. Which actually the Ralph Lauren staff today are still encouraged to do. They're still encouraged to do that. And of course, fashion historians will know that around that time there was a man called Mr. Fish, Michael Fish, who was making these wide kipper ties. He started at Turnbull and Asser, then he developed his own brand, had a shop on Clifford Street, and all the labels say peculiarly for Mr. Fish. And they were wide, they were 4-inch blades, they were made of heavy fabrics. Ralph used to take sofas, settees, chairs, and cut them up and make ties from them. They were so otherworldly from what you correctly said was the norm at that time. There were rep stripes, the heraldry, there was the odd polka dot. But what he was doing was completely without precedent in America at that time. And he took such pride in these ties. Worked from a little 10-foot square office in where was it? It was downtown somewhere in New York. And no windows at all, but his entire collection was in a drawer. Just worked out of a drawer in his office. So he did everything himself. His mother would sew in the labels. He delivered them himself. He invoiced them. So he was a one-man band.
Have you followed Ralph Lauren and his progress from ties into the other merchandise?
No. I came on board in the early 70s. And I remember it very, very well. It was when Mr. Lauren opened his first shop in Bond Street. So, first American designer to open a shop outside of America. First shop of that nature on Bond Street. And they presented it in the Evening Standard the night before they opened. Mm-hmm. It was in Savory Mall, which was a chemist, which was a bow-fronted chemist, Georgian building. And the spread in the Evening Standard, it just ignited something inside me. There was Ralph, looking tanned, young, very handsome, in an old Levi's shirt that was worn and frayed, with what I always used to call in my old hippie days a granddad vest underneath, worn jeans, and a beautiful conch belt, like a Navajo Indian belt. I thought, wow, that's an amazing look. And he was very into this little house on the prairie kind of look at the time. And so I hot-footed it down to Bond Street and went in the store. I was one of their first customers. And thereafter began my love affair with Ralph Lauren.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great story because I think one of the achievements that he made was that he took elements and mixed them up into a new style.
Oh yeah.
Right? He took the American image, that heritage,
yes,
and blended it with old world traditions and items and created an entirely new look that people found mesmerizing.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So in 1970, he won the Coty Award. It was a very prestigious fashion award. And for the presentation, and the pictures are iconic, there is a black dinner jacket, very classic dinner jacket, ring collar, bootlace tie, faded jeans, and cowboy boots.
Yeah.
Nobody had done that before. How brave was that? How brave was that? So you're right. You know, he said once, I don't like clothes that look new. I don't like things that look glossy or perfect. The clothes should look as though they've got some kind of ancestry, that they've been worn a long time. Wear your clothes in such a way that they become part of you.
And, you know, that wasn't just talk, but I think he was also someone who very early recognized the value of all these old, worn things.
Oh, yes.
Because we talked to many people. We talked to, Jeremy Hackett, and he said, Ralph Lauren came in and bought secondhand clothes by the sackful.
I remember that time.
And we talked to Tim Bent from Bentley, and he said, I used to go out and buy things for Ralph Lauren. We went to Michael German Antiques, and Dominic Strickland, the proprietor, is a big fan of campaign furniture. And he had beautiful pieces in there.
Camp desks and things
like
that.
When you go into a Ralph Lauren store, you'll see that old campaign furniture. And of course he had made enough money so he could send out buying teams and buy up all that stuff.
I want that job. Don't you?
You did?
You know, I want that job. You travel the world with a black Ralph Lauren Amex car and you buy up fabulous vintage pieces and antiques. What a wonderful job.
And Tim Bentley said, we had goals. We had, today, we're going to buy 20 of these, 30 of these. Yeah. And so they went out early and then shipped it back to the US for the boutiques.
Wonderful.
That's really amazing. And I think as a continuation of that worn and vintage look, I always look at it, Ralph Lauren does not sell with words. They sell with the image.
Absolutely.
It's the image
Absolutely.
that creates that lifestyle.
Absolutely. He understood that so well. He understood it before anybody else.
Yeah, he was the pioneer.
You know, lifestyle is a very ubiquitous sort of term today. Everybody uses it. But he was the first man who wanted to dress a man's life.
Yes.
So if he went skiing in Aspen, you know, he wanted to do the sort of sample sweaters. And if he had a ranch in Colorado, he wanted to do all the cowboy gear. If he worked on Wall Street, he wanted the double chalk stripe, a pinstripe suit, you know. So
And he blended this, right? Like, I'm a big fan of the Ralph Lauren purple label from Chester Berry.
Yeah.
Sadly, the Crew factory is no more.
Yeah.
But the suits were remarkable. They had that English look, but there was a softness. So
Yes.
there was a slight variation on it. But yeah, this mood board today, most people make a mood board. But I
Yeah.
think they probably were one of the first people to do that kind of stuff, to say, what emotion do we want to evoke?
Right.
Like, and that's
Right.
passion is an emotion.
Oh yeah, absolutely. May I just add, Dougie Hayward in
Yes.
the early days. Dougie Hayward was a great friend of Ralph, so he consulted with Dougie about getting the English cut absolutely right. And that was a wonderful time when they introduced Purple Label, I think in the mid-90s. But it's interesting because you're quite right, Raphael. It embraces so much. I walked through the store with a friend of mine yesterday, and he kind of, oh no, I like that. I don't like that. I like that. And I'm not into that. There is so much encompassed within the world of Ralph Lauren. So much. Just harping back to vintage looks. I was talking to my friend Dennis, who runs the RRL brand, and he said from next fall they're incorporating Ralph Lauren Vintage, which is a separate brand in itself, which will be amalgamated with RRL. So Ralph, you're absolutely right.
They're taking old Ralph Lauren pieces, or
no.
General vintage pieces?
General vintage, and sold within the RRL stable, as it were.
Which makes perfect sense because
Yes,
the
it
feel is
does.
there. Even if you go to the Rhinelander Mansion, they have, vintage cufflinks, and they have vintage items here or there, but more so in the RRL range.
Absolutely.
But even before that, I think, you mentioned the vintage aspect. One thing that I greatly appreciate is vintage Ralph Lauren. I love vintage polo Ralph Lauren. And because it was such a big brand and they were so prolific in what they produced, the range of colors. If you want an interesting look and you may not have the budget, you can go onto eBay and secondhand stores and find all of these great clothes, right? Like I love the Ralph Lauren shorts, that all the patterns they had, where it's madras, seersucker, different colors, different patterns, and oftentimes they used original, military garment cuts. So you get these little details like the ticket pocket that at the time no one else would do but them.
Absolutely.
And so I love that aspect of menswear, that, even though for many it may have this kind of more elitist, expensive, upscale feel, you can still partake because it has been around for so long.
At any level. You're buying into the dream. You're buying into the dream. Paul Smith had this expression. He said, you buy a Ralph Lauren polo shirt and you get a free English country house. So, in the store, I never minded if somebody came in and bought a pair of socks. They were buying into the dream. And they'd walk out of those doors onto Bond Street with their blue Ralph Lauren bag, and there's the pony player, and they swanned up the street and they felt $1 million. They'd spend about $10, but they felt $1 million. And that is just wonderful marketing. It's wonderful marketing.
And I remember in the beginning, you would look at the label, it would often say, made in the USA of imported fabric.
Yeah.
And I definitely, when I first had Ralph Lauren things, it was probably in the early 2000s. And they were of great quality. I remember I had this red cotton sweater. It was like a crew neck. I don't like crew necks today much anymore, but it was a bit crisper, but it really held up well. But then, a few years later, my wife's grandmother would often give me a Polo Ralph Lauren sweater for Christmas because she could easily buy it at Macy's. And, I always liked the styling, but I noticed that, now it was made in Sri Lanka or Malaysia or China, and the quality wasn't quite as top-notch anymore. It was softer, and when you have a softer cotton, it has to be, sometimes a shorter staple length, but then you would get more pilling.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward to today, we walked into the Ralph Lauren store here in London, and they had a beautiful, very classic polo overcoat, and it was 100% camel hair, made in the USA.
Yes.
And I was like, that is really cool.
Oh, I saw it yesterday.
They recognized the iconic.
Yeah, but it's always there. It's always been there. It's always been in the line. Always, every season.
I mean, it was 2,500 pounds, I think.
That's right.
But it had the flap pocket and the chest, and I thought it was pretty cool to see that. Even though that the most prestigious label is Purple Label, which it seems these days is mostly made in Italy.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe some things are still made in England.
And the original concept was English made. So I believe Thermal and Assa were doing the shirts and ties. I say Dougie Haywood and Chester Berry later on were doing all the suitings. Footwear, Purple Label foot was always Edward Green.
And I think they changed over the years. There were like Graziano Girling for a while.
Yes.
Edward Green.
Yes. These days it's mostly Italian made.
Yes.
Yeah. But interesting, we're talking about, these fabrics, these worn fabrics. One day at the factory of Crockett & Jones, this old field jacket turns up. An old, worn, distressed field jacket with a note from Ralph that said, "Please make a pair of saddle shoes out of this jacket." To him it was the most natural thing in the world.
Talking about saddle shoes.
Yeah, the saddle.
Are these Ralph Lauren saddle shoes?
It's Crockett & Jones for Ralph Lauren, and we did such a variety of saddles from over the year. I remember one year he wanted the classic saddle with a Madras saddle. Isn't that what they call the saddle? So an extraordinary set of combinations. I think one year for Tom Brown, I think it was, we did it in cordovan and hairy cowhide, the saddle. Bizarre combinations. But I see saddles, I always think of Norman Rockwell, the American illustrator. If you look at Norman Rockwell from the 50s and 60s, all his characters always wore saddles.
And
the older the better.
It's a very quintessential American style, right? And now sometimes it's a little adopted with loafers sometimes. It can be a penny loafer, and it has a very kind of distinct, a small saddle, but technically it's still a saddle shoe. It just may not look like it.
Can I tell you a story about Mr. Lauren himself and shoes? I was in the store one of his visits, and I was called down to what they called the gun room, and what a manager said, "Michael, can you come down? Mr. Lauren would like to speak to you." And I have to say about the man, charming, gentle, courteous, ever so pleasant, softly spoken. He was wearing an old Gucci loafer, so he bought Gucci from the 70s. And it was a Gucci driving shoe, really. And the saddle it was coming away. It was coming away. And he said, he said, Mike, can we get this fixed? Can we get this? I said, yeah, sure, we can get it fixed here in town. He said, so how are we going to do this? He said, what kind of stitch should we have? What about the density of the stitch? What color do you think? Should we do it here to Raphael? It was an hour's conversation. It was an hour's conversation over 2 or 3 stitches on a shoe. And I thought, but he was wonderful, he was courteous through it all. And I thought, I know now the grief that he put all these tailors through in the early days. And most of the tailors he worked with of that period, was it Timmy Palazzo was one who's often mentioned, a New York tailor. Oh boy, about drove him crazy, because he knew what he wanted and he wouldn't be swayed. And his tailor says, I was working with him one day and we've got the coat on the mannequin, and I was saying, I want this, it's going on and on. In exasperation, the tailor takes the jacket off of the mannequin, throws it on the floor, starts jumping up and down on it. But he had to get it the way he wanted. He wasn't going to compromise.
It's interesting because, I heard someone say, first-time entrepreneurs are always very concerned about product. Second-time entrepreneurs are all concerned about distribution.
Yeah.
So in Ralph Lauren's case, he had this obsession with product. And I can really relate to that because with our own stuff, right, you want to get it right, you want to test it, you want to get that quality, and you're putting an immense amount of pride into the product. But he also managed to scale the business and distribute it and become this worldwide brand that is so well known and unique and loved. And so I have great respect for that.
And also, you have to take into consideration, in the early days, he was manufacturing as well. So he wasn't using vendors, he wasn't subcontracting work. He was responsible for manufacturing, so it was an extraordinary task. And of course, eventually, he had to give that up.
Well, plus, if you have a talent, right? If your talent is the design, and you're really good at that, why would you spend your time doing operations, right? What is the issue with the sewing machine?
Yeah.
Why would you waste your time on this when someone else maybe can do it much better than you, and you can fully focus on what you excel at?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he clearly did, in a way, right?
He clearly did.
And with another thing that I really appreciate about Ralph Lauren, when you walk into the store, like Purple Label is their evening section. They always have interesting tuxedos and dinner jackets in particular, right? Every season,
it's always interesting.
And for most people, they're too loud, right? They're bold, they're extravagant. It may be not even navy blue, but more like dark blue shawl collar tuxedo with a 4-1 button configuration.
Yeah.
Or I remember when we were at the Rhinelander Mansion once, these dinner jackets, which were like white with black streaks, all kind of in parallel, all over. We're like, wow, that is bold, and a bold price to match. But at least it's pushing the envelope consistently, and it inspires to, not just have that black tuxedo, maybe the midnight tuxedo, but to think outside the box and say, oh, there's a white dinner jacket. What else can we do?
Yeah.
Where can we add a little twist?
And Raphael, it was never stuffy. It was never starched. It was never tight. He wanted his men to be active and to be comfortable and to be easy in his clothing. I mean, going back to the Coty Awards with the jeans, there was another great ad from the 80s, and the 80s was the golden era of Ralph Lauren ads, with a man, tuxedo, dressed, he's obviously going to a dinner party of some sort, in the snow, leading a horse with a Stetson and a raccoon coat over the top. It's an amazing image, an incredible image. And it was sort of democratized the clothing in a way and said, you don't have to be part of an elite. You don't have to be part of the English aristocracy to wear this. And I think he did us all a great service. You know, he opened all those closets, all those attics, and all those English country homes, and took all that stuff, made it, and sold it back to us. We didn't know what we had under our own noses. Yeah.
So you had the privilege of being inside a store, and I think one of the fascinating things is when you go into one of the Ralph Lauren stores, be it the kind of prime headquarter right in their mansion, or a store in another city, you walk in and there's a specific old world feel to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you were there, did you have specific instructions on how things were styled, or how did that all happen inside those stores?
Was a creative team, huge creative team. They operated then, and I think they still do, above 143 Bond Street, which was the old kids store. When they moved to number 1 Bond Street, the original store became a kids store, and the creative department worked above there. And so it was a whole battalion of very, very clever, creative people who would transform the store. Obviously, instructions were coming from Madison, and it was a specific look. But I was in awe at the speed at which they worked, the accuracy. If they were doing a Navajo kind of look, and it's in it's in Arizona, the sandstone and the sand and the cacti had to be absolutely right. Again, as with everything, tremendous attention to detail. But that was absolutely thrilling. Very, very talented people.
So you didn't have anything to do with the insert presentation, like the ties?
I probably had a little more than they would like me to be, because I wanted to get my product out there. So I quite often got told off for putting my product in the wrong places. But hey, I'm a salesman as well. But yeah, that was pretty tightly controlled, really. But on your point about the stores, Ralph had this philosophy that if you walked into one of his stores, it was the same as inviting you into one of his homes. And of course, all the rooms in number 1 Bond, they all have a name. There's the gun room, there's the stack room, there's the trophy room. And anyone who's been there, and if you haven't, please go. It's possibly the most beautiful store in the world. It feels leisurely. You just want to curl up on one of those Chesterfield sofas and order some Dom Perignon, and there you get stuck there all day long. It's a wonderful environment, but they wanted that very, very easy bonhomie, just like inviting someone into their own homes. And if you use the wonderful book that's there at the moment is, of course, Ralph Lauren Living, where you can see not only his homes, but other beautiful homes around the world.
Because, he has all these beautiful English, country style horrors and whatnot paintings. That's one thing. But then also, I think another thing he did that is maybe kind of gone unnoticed is to upgrade dressing rooms. A dressing room experience, they're not this kind of tight little thing at the back of the shop.
Oh, yeah.
It's an experience. They're spacious, they're stylish.
Yeah.
They, have an aesthetic, and they're part of the entire concept.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Washrooms as well for that. It's everything. It's absolutely everything. There was nothing unattended to. And it's Ralph's way of living. And it was that same visual ethic, from menswear to womenswear to children to home. He designed his life. And he saw himself in every scenario. He saw himself there. So if he's in his Bedford estate, he saw himself as a sort of Cotswold squire, and if he saw himself in the Colorado ranch, there
Exactly.
he was. He's a cowboy out on the range. Wherever he was, he lived that. He always said, I saw myself. Anything that he designed, and so it's an important distinction. He claims he never really designed anything. He doesn't like being called a fashion designer. He's a stylist. But everything that he conceived in his imagination was him wearing that, So Wimbledon, he sees himself hitting the ball over the net and on centre court.
That's quite remarkable, right? That, Wimbledon is like a quintessential British all-England tennis tournament. And to have, this American brand outfit, the ball boys and everything, I find that quite remarkable.
Yeah. He says that when we got the contract, he said, I looked through their archives and it wasn't kind of the way I saw it, so I designed the Wimbledon range the way I saw it anyway. So maybe historically that isn't too accurate. The same as when he has to think about English sports. So he loves cricket, he loves rugby. He did a cricket thing back in the 80s, and it was a little bit cheesy because it was done in America. And I knew one of the models, Tim Easton, who was British. He was raised in the same town on the south coast as I was. And he said, Michael, I had to teach the other models how to play cricket. He's always had this fascination with the English countryside, or the equestrian world, obviously. But one thing I find absolutely fascinating in the whole Ralph Lauren story is the young boy of 15, 16, just emerging into the world, this young Jewish kid from the Bronx, but he sees an English hacking jacket and he loves it. He loves the way it's waisted, he loves the latchet, he loves the Harris tweed. And I think, where did that come from? There's nothing in his background, nothing in his ancestry, no visual reference, never been to England, but something in him said, that's just right.
Was it an emotional trigger?
It's an emotional trigger. That's the look I want. And if you were to ask me about the whole Ralph Lauren story, I think that's the most fascinating period. He goes to work for Brooks Brothers and comes in contact with this waspy clientele and learns about the whole Yale look. Fascinating.
Yeah, he probably realized,
intrigued.
I didn't maybe know about this, but this resonates with me.
Definitely.
That is me, and
Definitely.
then took it from there.
Definitely.
Well, Michael, your outfit is definitely, quintessential Ralph Lauren. Can you walk us through what you're wearing here?
You're very kind. It's not all Ralph.
And it's okay.
Fair,
but the style could be the style out of, that's what I would, the quintessential, salesperson at Ralph Lauren to look like.
Yeah.
Like you're embodying that, Like your hat, for example, right? It's a Panama hat.
Panama.
But, it has a blue ribbon.
Yeah.
And it's a ribbon that has been worn. It's not brand new.
And it's got a hole in it as well.
Exactly. It has the nice fold. It's slightly different.
You pay more for the hole,
Yeah.
So, the influences were, as we say, Ivy League, very much so. So saddles were classically Ivy League. The club collars.
Yep.
The tie isn't a tie he would have designed in '67, but nevertheless it's very Ralph-esque. Madras is an old Brooks Brothers staple in multitudes.
The waspy staple,
The
yes.
waspy staple, absolutely waspy staple. So there were all these influences that became a classic Ralph Lauren look, as well as the historic references, clothes from the 20s, 30s, 40s. He was a great film buff. He made a study of all of Cary Grant's movies. He was a great fan of Cary Grant, Fred Astaire as well. But he studied everything: a pocket flap, a working cuff. He studied these, and very often, because as we said, he wasn't a designer, never went to fashion school, couldn't draw. He would watch the movies, and of course, as before, you could stop a movie and replay it and say, "Oh, let's look at that still again," with an illustrator next to him who would draw that particular detail. He said, "That shirt, that's exactly how I want the shirt." So these were all inspirations. And when you consider, so Polo was inaugurated as a company in 1967 by, as we said, he won the Coty Award in 70. I think it was in 72 he did The Great Gatsby with Bob Redford in the pink suit.
It's interesting because
the three-piece pink suit with the pink baker's boy hat. Now, they say only real men wear pink. That was just extraordinary. And that was Ralph. That was Ralph who dressed that movie.
So if I watch the Gatsby movie today, the Robert Redford one, it definitely looks a bit dated to me. It doesn't have the proper 1930s look. It looks a bit of the time. And it's when you sometimes see the Art Deco stuff from the 90s, it is a bit strange. Then again, I'm sure
did you prefer the Baz Luhrmann one with DiCaprio?
The Baz Luhrmann, it to me had some of those Ralph Lauren vibes. In a sense, you look at the setup and it's beautiful. You want to be there. Were the details as good? No, they weren't. And I think consistently, I think American movies, are not so concerned about the accuracy. And sometimes people say, it's just about the interpretation of the director. But sometimes I don't know if that truly is it.
Yeah.
Well, what about you? Which one do you like more from the
I
Gatsby's?
didn't like the DiCaprio one, but I think largely I didn't care for DiCaprio's characterization of Gatsby. I found him neurotic and a little effeminate as well. I just didn't like him. He wasn't the Gatsby that I know reading the novel.
And I agree. The movie itself, overall, the storyline and the acting, I didn't like that as much, but I liked the aesthetics of it. When there's that scene where they fly over things. So I think the camera angles they used at the time was something new.
Yeah.
It was different. Today you have drones and everyone knows these shots. But I remember at the time sitting in a movie theater and feeling like, wow, that was pretty cool. At that time, though, I already was into men's clothing, and I thought, they could have done better here, they could have done better there, but
I liked the soundtrack.
Yes.
I didn't think I was going to. Lana Del Rey, and it was a pretty crazy soundtrack, but I enjoyed it.
So, regarding Ralph Lauren, he had this great run so far, and he's obviously alive and well, and I wish him well, and I hope he'll be among us for a very long time. But I'm also kind of wondering, who can fill those shoes? We'll see.
We will see. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Stay tuned. He has this magical eye. And I think despite the fact that now we have an archive of almost 60 years old, and he does keep one of every single product he's ever produced.
That must be a massive archive.
Wow.
Do you know where that is?
At one time it was out in New Jersey, and there's a warehousing facility out in New Jersey. I heard that it moved to Madison.
But if you think about it, though, that might be a gigantic gift for classic menswear to have a Ralph Lauren archive that contains every piece ever made.
Oh, I mean, there'll be a retrospective at some point. The V&A will do it, of course, but it was... so that's a living archive. That's a living archive. And of course, I mean, as you know, Raphael, you could take one of those pieces from the early 70s and it's wearable today. It's perfectly wearable. So sometimes the cut changes slightly, the block changes slightly, but the aesthetic doesn't change. So I like to think that will survive, that will always be there. That will always be there. And it's constantly evolving. I was in the store yesterday. They now have this wonderful brand called Naomi Glasses, where they're working with a Native American weaver. And this woman is weaving cloths according to the Navajo tradition. And it's fabulous. If you haven't seen it, she's the first resident artist for Ralph Lauren. And it's simply beautiful. So it is constantly evolving. Little twists, little turns here and there.
Well, Michael, this was a fantastic conversation.
That was a lovely little chat, wasn't it?
Thank you so much. And I'd be honored.
We were just getting started.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying, why don't we start going to the Ralph Lauren store and walk it together?
What a great idea.
And talk about it.
What a great idea.
Let's do that.
What a great idea.
Good.